All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleischer Show, and it's great to be with you, but I wish I was here under better circumstances. And that's because 20 years ago to this very day on the English calendar, a very famous Israeli tourism minister, Rechavam Ze'evi, was assassinated Wednesday morning, 17th of October, 2001, at the hotel that was called then the Hyatt Hotel in Jerusalem. And he was hit by a squad of Palestinian terrorists acting on behalf of the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Ze'evi was the first Israeli minister to be assassinated since the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, but he was the most senior person to be murdered by Palestinian militants. Now, Ze'evi was famous in that he held a very hard line against terrorism and was known. He was also at one time a general. Came back to Hebron in 1967 after remembering that he was a kid there, and as a kid getting slapped on the seventh step, trying to pray in the Tomb of the Patriarchs and Matriarchs, and he came there and blew it up. The staircase that was a Muslim staircase that was attached to the building, and he was a very intense fellow, and he also called for transfer of terrorists out of the land of Israel, and he was identified by the Palestinian cause as somebody to get rid of, because if you can't silence the guy, you can't pay him off, you can't erase his good name, you can't besmirch him, then the way to do it is to just get rid of him. And almost to the day, we now commemorate the murder of an amazing British MP, conservative MP, that's member of parliament, Sir David Amess, who was murdered after being stabbed multiple times at his Essex constituency, and what the police are now calling a terrorist incident. Basically, he was on his church steps, chatting and laughing with locals, and then suddenly a man emerged from a small group and attacked him, stabbing him several times, and this led to his death. Now, the man that has been captured and is going to be charged with the murder has a Muslim name, and already the police are saying that it was indeed a jihadist terrorist attack. And so we have almost 20 years to the day from Rechavam Ze'evi. MP David Ames has been shut down. And if you read all of the information about him, he's a very loved person, and he's been was knighted in 2015. But what they don't say in all the articles that I have found, anyway, in the British newspapers, is that he was extremely pro-Israel. And that the likelihood is that this Muslim assailant, this jihadist assailant, got rid of David Ames because he was indeed pro-Israel. Now, I was already writing about this and tweeting about this, and I saw that Prime Minister Netanyahu tweeted himself about MP David Ames, Sir David Ames. But my good friend Reuven Pittenger writes to me, and he says to me, Yishai, I don't know if you know this, but Ames was a good friend. Amos was a good friend of our family. And in fact, my father, who was a U.S. congressman, knew him very well and called him upon him for many events. And he was at our weddings and all of our joyous occasion. And Congressman Robert Pittenger, who we have here with us today, who represented Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 terms with his focus on national security, foreign investment reform. And that means that terrorism can't sneak in through the U.S. investments, tax reform and religious freedom. He was chairman of the Congressional Task Force on Terrorism and Unconventional Warfare and vice chairman of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Terrorism and Illicit Finance. And what they don't say in his bio is that he's got his name on a flag that was dedicated by Congress to the Jewish community of Hebron, and he's got his name on it, Robert Pittenger. You have your name on it. Robert, Congressman Pittenger, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sad that I had to invite you on for these circumstances, but tell me a little bit about MP David Ames and what happened to him on Friday.
Thank you, Rabbi Fleischer. Sir David Ames and I met in 1988 on a trip to Moscow, and we were there with an organization called Christian Solidarity, and our intent was to help make sure that 118 prisoners of conscience who those who were detained in prison, Christians and Jews and others, that we could have them released from prison. And David was so eloquent. He was a new member of Parliament, essentially. Another member of Congress came with us, Frank Wolf. Both of them were outstanding in their presentations. There was a big dinner at the American Embassy that Jack Matlock hosted, our ambassador, members of the Politburo and others were there. And they challenged them that religious freedom and human rights and issues of freedoms of conscience were issues of that embraced all Americans and all people from Britain. They weren't liberal or conservative or Tory or Labor, Democrat or Republican. They were values that were essential if they wanted to embrace our country and embrace us as some type of partner in some form. So that's where David and I hit it off. We were together for 8 days on that trip, and we became very close. Of course, we're godparents to his sweet daughter, Florence, and as Bobby mentioned to you and conveyed, and you conveyed, we share family weddings and events and all. I have never seen David Amess angry. I've never seen him trash other people. He wrote a book, The Eyes and Ears of Parliament, and most books like that, I get about halfway through, and they're all praising themselves. And I'd read as much about how glorious they are, and then I move on to the next book. David's book was about other people, praising everyone else. He didn't come after anyone with a sword. He talked about the traditions of Parliament and how it had transitioned over the near 4 decades that he's been there, and much to his disappointment in terms of traditions, but never to malign people. He was so loved. Big smile all the time. I'm going to miss that smile. I loved him. He was like a brother to me. He's frankly my closest friend. And he was the quintessential politician that you want who cares and loves people. And that's what he was about. He never sought to be a big player in the national British government. He loved his job serving his constituents. They call it surgeries in the UK. We call it town hall meetings and private meetings with our constituents. But he never missed a Friday going out to his district. And I walked his district with him just a month ago. We were there for a daughter's wedding. And people loved him. They waving all the time. And he's just a big smile. So here's this brutal, horrific murder to one of the nicest, kindest, gentlest people I've ever known. It behooves me while life has been taken. I would say this, his convictions were just as strong and meaningful as his warmth of demeanor. David never softened, whether it was pro-life issues about animals, issues about being pro-Israel, to make sure that we're strong against terrorist threats and other adversarial states. In fact, he was the keynote speaker September 6th for our Parliamentary Intelligence Security Forum that we had in Budapest. We had 208 members of Parliament from 54 countries who were there. And I asked David to come and give the opening address. He was remarkable, right on point. He understood the outcome and the fallout of what's going to happen as a result of this debacle in Afghanistan. And he discussed very specifically the challenges we face together as freedom-loving people. So David was not soft on convictions. He stood strong for Israel. He loved Israel. And he always sought to do whatever he could to advance the cause of freedom for the people who living in Israel.
Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu eulogized David Amess in a tweet, and he mentioned him, and I just want to ask you, like, why? Okay, I mean, what did he do? This is a show about Israeli issues, so I just want to understand. Like, I know that he was also pro-Brexit. I know that he had a long-running campaign to make a city called Southend a city, and he had a lot of issues that he took very personally. one could probably guess he was also Roman Catholic, by the way,
Sure.
right? Which was interesting. And he supported a ban on fox hunting.
Sure.
He was against fox. Speaking of tradition, that's a pretty British thing to do, fox hunting, and yet he was against it. but he was stabbed to death today by a 25-year-old Somali, and that Somali's name is Ali Harb, or Harbi Ali. And the reason that stuck out to my wife and I is because the word harb means sword. And so this guy, really, that's what he was. He was a sword. And he came and he stabbed MP Amess. And I just want to understand, what do you think? Why do you think that he was, gunned down? Why was he taken down today, on Friday in England? There's many other parliamentarians. Why was his voice shut down? Was it just madness, or was there something specific?
I don't know the mind of a terrorist. David was the most thoughtful, loving person, expressed by many from the opposition party in Parliament. It is such a paradox and so difficult to absorb because of his kindness. If that person would have come up to him and expressed his concerns and his objections, David would have listened quietly and thoughtfully and did what he could to embrace that individual. He's never turned his nose up on anyone. So I don't have an answer for that. I do know.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess that even though he was a sweet and gentle individual, he was probably full of conviction. And that's why he stood strong behind Brexit and stood strong behind Israel and the jihad.
There was no softening to his convictions based on his personality. Right. He was very strong at what he believed, and as you're right, he was very strong to support Israel. But he was also out front with us last month in a forum that was frankly broadcast live stream around the world, going after the terrorist. And I would hate to think that was part of why this happened to him. But I'm sobered with that reality. I loved him as a brother. And if his attending that and speaking to that had anything to do with his demise, it would just grieve me the worst.
Yeah, the thing is, Congressman, is that the enemies of Israel, they are very successful in cajoling young people on campus, having the media stand with them, and having a lot of European parliamentarians stand on their side and call against Israel, call Israel every kind of name. Even in the United States of America recently, the vice president seemed to uphold the idea that Israel is not only an occupier, an apartheid state, but a genocidal state. Mm-hmm. And so here comes a parliamentarian who, even by the newspaper accounts, is a backbencher, and yet at the same time, strong in his conviction. And because his conviction is strong and it also makes sense, people go over to his side. And so a young man who has a jihadi consciousness says, no problem. If I can't convince him, and if he's in our way, then the only thing to do is to get out, get him off the scene, take him out, rub him out, finish the job, and not have his kind of voice in our way. And this also sends a signal to other parliamentarians or leaders or thinkers or academics or actors or press people. This is how we roll. This is what we're going to shut these mouths. And you could either live a nice peaceful life if you go along with it, or you could just shut your mouth and exist, or you open your mouth and say that you stand with Israel and stand with these values, and you will suffer a great price for that. And that's what I think happened today, and that's what happened to the great Minister Rehavam Ze'evi.
Yes, sir. Your analysis is correct, but I think that's unfortunately the price of liberty. I lived in Washington back in the early mid-'70s, and below me was the Iwo Jima Memorial. And every single Tuesday at 5 o'clock, the Marine Band would come and they would celebrate at the Iwo Jima Memorial. Wow. But one Tuesday in November of 1975, they came and dressed all in different uniforms. I thought that's really strange. So I got off my balcony. I walked down to the base of the Iwo Jima. This is where the Marines hold up the flag. And I said, "Sir, officer, why are you dressed in different uniforms?" He said, "Sir, those uniforms represent every battle and war we fought in the last 200 years. What a sobering thought. I wept. But liberty, there's a price always to be paid. And thank God for people like David Amess and through the centuries have stood for liberty. You have leaders in President Rabin, Prime Minister Rabin. I cried when he was taken out. There was a price that we all pay, and we're out on the front line. And when you do that, you know that. And frankly, there had been a death threat already issued on David's life. He understood that. He went anyhow. He had a job to do. He loved his people. He loved serving. He wanted to do the right thing all the time. And that's what happened to him.
Very, very sad and heartbreaking, and at the same time distressing that such is the case. There's some discussion now about the security or lack thereof. Sir David Amess was married with 5 children. He served as an MP for 38 years. And as I said before, he was raised as a Roman Catholic. And he was a friend to Israel to the point that Prime Minister Netanyahu eulogized him in a tweet, and probably more than that. Just some comments from our listeners today. Johan, my good friend, says, one second, we're having some technical difficulties today. He says, Baruch Amet. He says, God bless the brave soul of Sir David Amess, who stood for truth and Israel. And Allison writes, she writes, the British press have said the 25-year-old is the son of someone previously close to the Somali prime minister. His family lives in an affluent area in London. We'll see if that's true. And says, my friend Joanne again, he says, just one second, that jihadists who stand for lies will only fail miserably. Well, let's just ask one last question, Congressman Pittenger. David Amess, if he continued to be alive today, what would he be standing for?
Everything he's stood for the last 38 years, from the time that I met him in Moscow, and he stood strong for those who are being persecuted for their faith. He spoke for those who couldn't speak for themselves. He speaks for the unborn. He speaks for those who are in prison. He speaks for those who are under siege by terrorist groups. So David never backed down from a concern that affected real people's lives.
Congressman Robert Pittenger, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. May your friend MP David Amess's memory be a blessing, but also may we not accept these things as just part and parcel of daily life. There's a shutdown of voices here.
If I could, I had dozens of town hall meetings. I was in the public all the time. But I had police who attended me. I didn't go anywhere. I'm not stupid. I know my job, and I know what I've been doing for the last 8 years in terms of counterterrorism. But I do not understand why there is not a strong security presence in every public meeting, particularly one that's announced. His was announced. There should have been police there. Had there been a policeman there, his life could have been spared. And I hope that they make provision for that in the future. Yes, we've got to be willing to pay a price, but let's don't be stupid about it.
Okay, there you go. And security is definitely part of it. That's definitely the ethos here in Israel, which is if you let your guard down, the bad guys can take control and shut your voice down. We will not let that happen. Congressman Robert Pittenger represented Charlotte, North Carolina for 3 terms. That's a great office with a focus on national security, foreign investments reform, tax reform, and religious freedom. A great lover of Israel yourself,
sure.
Congressman Pittenger, and we want to thank you so much for your great support And again, remembering David Amess, Sir David Amess, MP, Conservative MP in England, who was stabbed to death this Friday. His memory and his legacy will continue to be a blessing. Congressman Pittenger, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the tribute to Sir David Amess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you for coming on. And I just think the reason I wanted to have this segment on the show today was just very simple. I don't want to give that jihad a ability to shut down a voice and then have it be forgotten. And even in this article that I printed out, I saw that The Guardian and whoever, or BBC, did not explain what really happened. And the question of motivation should be the first motivation. And we are living in a time where there's an effort to shut down voices. And I myself am engaged in a big Twitter battle right now about Ireland. And you should see the incredible anti-Semitism that is being projected out there. So the one thing I like about social media is that at least you get to see how many anti-Semites are out there. I do also want to say that today is the day of passing of one more great person. That's the passing of Rachel, the biblical matriarch Rachel. That biblical matriarch Rachel, it says the book of Jeremiah, continues to cry until all her children come home. She refuses to be consoled. And there's something right about that. Sometimes we shouldn't be overly easily to console and just say that's just the way it is. We should say, no, I'm not going to be consoled. I'm not going to be consoled until there's security, till there's freedom. And I'm not going to be consoled until the Jewish people really have the right to come home, and indeed come home to be close to God and to be a great nation, a great society that lights a light of godliness throughout this world. And Rachel, she was the matriarch that really built the Jewish family together with her sister Leah and the two handmaidens. And in that way, Bilhah and Zilpah, in that way, gave birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. But Rachel, who is buried in Bethlehem, for she died in childbirth when her son Benjamin was being born here in the land of Israel. The only one of the 12 tribes who was actually born here in the land of Israel. She passed away in childbirth, but in many ways is considered the mother of the Jewish people, and again refuses to be consoled, and she continues to cry. When Jews come on Aliyah to the land of Israel, I always say to them, go to Kevrachel. Tell her, Rachel, Mother Rachel, you can keep crying, but not for me, because I am home. And that's what indeed people do today. And we're going to keep being strong with that connection to our matriarchs and patriarchs. We're going to remember the past, and we're going to remember the slain British MP, David Amess, who stood with Israel and I think died for Israel as well. We'll find out in the future what exactly happened there, but that is my prediction. I want to thank you so much for being with me. Please write me an email, yishai@yishaifleischer.com, yishai@yishaifleischer.com. Please follow all of our good work. You can find us on Twitter, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and you can find us on our website, yishaifleischer.com, and on our weekly email, which is really fun, and our weekly podcast as well. So lots of great stuff. Thank you very much to Moshe Herman, to Ben Bresky, to Tabitha, to Yocheved, and live with me is my friend Lou Weiss, who says to me, Shalom Yishai, looks and sounds good. Lou, may it look and sound good in the eyes of God. God bless you folks wherever you are. Lots of love, lots of strength, lots of memory that will lead us to a better future. Let's keep on being strong out there, because we got to be strong. We cannot let the other side win. And may God be with us in all of our steps. God bless you folks. Stay tuned, stay strong, stay connected, and shalom.